Now, I would like to move to our last speaker of this session before we go for lunch. And it is Professor Ntayi from Uganda. Joseph is a well-distinguished speaker, an academic. He has written and published a lot of work. He's one of the key, if you like, pillars of WSD in Africa. He's the Dean, Faculty of Economics, Energy and Management Science, Makerere University, which is one of the best universities in Africa. The business school is a very well-established school in Africa. And he's joining us now from Uganda. It's always been a pleasure, Professor, to have you. Just let me say a few words about the Makerere University and the school, which is led by Professor Joseph. They have been remarkably contributing, not just to WSD, but to the global knowledge about entrepreneurship, management, sustainable development, and lots of issues in Africa, published in high-cited journals. They joined us in many conferences, and thank you very much. Professor, the floor is yours, and he's going to talk to us about climate shocks, adaptive mechanism, and household energy transition in Uganda. So the floor is yours, Professor. Unmute yourself and start.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this conference, more specifically Professor Ahmed, Allam, and Professor Farida Fortune, Director Center of Immunobiology. Thank you very much for organizing the conference and inviting us to speak. The paper that I'm going to present is a co-authored paper. I think you can see the co-authors' names appearing. And it's on climate shocks, adaptive mechanisms, and household energy transitions using data from Uganda. Right. As we try to, the structure of the presentation is as presented there. Introduction, I'll give a brief description of the data and the variables, results, and implications. And in the interest of time, I'll try to really summarize everything here. Now, we know very well that energy transition has become an urgent necessity in a world with a changing climate. And we also know that the changing climate is threatening the lives of around 3.3 to 3.6 billion people who are already living in settings that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And our work is actually centered in SDG 3, SDG 7, and SDG 13. We know that energy transitions is actually associated with the SDG 7, which actually advocates for ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And energy transition has implications for SDG 13, and more so the targets that are listed under SDG 13, like target 13.1, which talks about strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries. Ladies and gentlemen, when we conducted a systematic literature review, we discovered that extant literature is actually awash with the studies relating to adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters at both global and national levels. However, research addressing climate shocks and adaptive mechanisms and energy transitions at household levels is either sparse, anecdotal, or at best speculative. And yet humanity is faced with a fundamental question on how rapid and transformational societal change can be achieved to prevent dangerous levels of global warming. And we know that global warming is an issue today. It's a topical issue. So in our paper here, we bring this oversight into view and posit that energy transitions at household levels, household level, is affected by climate shocks and adaptive mechanisms. And we attempt to use data from Uganda Bureau of Statistics that has a number of waves. We actually have panel data, I think spanning over around 8 waves. And we use that data to test our argument. And ladies and gentlemen, we know that at the household level, transition to cooking fuels is critical for the achievement of sustainable development goals, especially the ones that I have just mentioned, SDG 3, SDG 7, and SDG 13. Now, that does not mean that the work I'm presenting is only limited to those 3 SDGs. Certainly, the work has implications for other SDGs. We use data from WOBOS 2019-2020, and the data set contains information relative to cooking fuels and the shocks that households have actually faced over a period of time. The data set includes about 3,088 households from the 8th wave of the Uganda National Household Panel survey conducted across the country. However, we only look at data for around 1,043 households that reported experiencing climate shocks. So we now move to the data and the variables before we go to the description of the data. Now, as I've already said, the data set contains information relating to cooking fuels. And the available cooking fuels from the data set are grouped into categories following the energy ladder. So those categories include modern, and of course, modern fuels. Here we have electricity, biomass, and the liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. We also have the transitional fuels that are presented in the data set, where you have kerosene and efficient methods of burning wood fuel. And then we have also traditional fuels like charcoal, firewood, and plant wastes, right? All of these aspects are listed. They are part of the data set that we obtained from WOBOS. Now, just to take you through the data set, of course, in the interest of time, we'll not go through everything, but you can see the traditional fuels there. So the households that are still using traditional fuels, about 97.5%. And those that have moved from traditional fuels to transitional fuels, like kerosene and efficient methods of burning wood fuel, about 0.8%. And you can see that those that have actually moved from traditional to modern fuels, like electricity, LPG, and biomass, only 2.7. So that percentage, as you can see, is quite small, with a very huge percentage of 97% still using charcoal and firewood. And I think you can see the destruction that the households are having on our ecosystem and the impact this is likely to have. Although the data we are using is actually from Uganda, I'm sure that the situation is not different on the African continent and probably some other parts of the world as well. Again, just to move through the data, as you can see, climate shocks you'll find that around 24.9% of the households actually experienced drought, and about 25.3% experienced floods. And we have these floods coming up as a result of climate change. Certainly, we know that very well. And about 25.2% of the households experiencing regular rains, and while about 24.74% of the households actually experienced landslides. And this is also quite important because we actually see the dangers of climate change and the effects that these things can have on households and the humanity in general. Now, of course, there are also adaptive mechanisms that households have tried to experiment with, like shock migration, and that's about 1.7%. And those that where the members migrated about 98.27%, and so forth. So I think you can see the percentage there, right? And of course, some people trying to earn a living, of course, by getting jobs elsewhere. And of course, while others, well, didn't have much to do in that case. Now, that is just in brief, the description of our data set, ladies and gentlemen. Now, before I move to the second table, we did some bit of, we carried out statistical estimations without really going into details, but we use multinomial logit regressions to estimate the impact of climate shocks and adaptive mechanisms on household decisions to move from unclean to transition or probably clean fuels in this case. And of course, the number of other things that I will not really go into the actual models that we used, but just to just give you some descriptives again before we move to the results of the regression. But you can see, on average, the age of the household head was about 49. It's about 49.7, and that's the age really, years, 49.7 years. The size is about 5 people, as you can see, and the welfare, of course, that is in Uganda shillings. That's the amount, and the expenditure on energy is about that, and the fuel cost is around that. Now, of course, when we carry out the multi-logit regression model, we get those results, as you can see, right? And these results are quite interesting, right? Because at least you can see what is happening here, right? Again, just looking at a few things about this data set, you'll discover that fuel cost is actually significant. And of course, you have other things there that are also significant. But all these have implications. But what I'll do, I'll just move down to the results that we obtained from marginal effects, right? Because most of these, as you can see, are not really very significant, but they have implications, because you can see, for example, the age of the household size, right, having a negative effect in this case. And of course, all that has implications. But let me move to these figures down here for the marginal effects, right? And these figures are quite important to us because they actually have implications. Now, of course, we have major findings from this. And as you can see, the age of the household head reduces the probability of switching from tradition to modern fuels for cooking, right? And of course, the percentage is also indicated there, of course, 0.059. Now, that has implications, right? Of course, the older the household age is, or the one, the more an individual becomes older, the less that individual is likely to switch to modern fuels, as you can see. Now, the implication here is that older heads of the households tend to incline on using the available and cheaper traditional fuels for cooking. Now, the second aspect that you get from that table there is that climate shocks reduce the probability of the household switching to modern fuels. Now, this has implications too, right? Whenever you get these climate shocks, right, as you can see, given when you look at the figures there, we discover that the more these people or the households experience these, the less they are actually inclined to moving or to switching, and of course for obvious reasons, because of the shocks that are impacted on the households. And of course, too, these people have to migrate to some other places. So in other words, their resilience levels actually goes down a little bit. And therefore, you cannot even start talking about transiting from the traditional fuels to modern fuels, as you can see. So, of course, the continued occurrence of climate shocks affects households' ability to transition to modern cooking fuels, right? Now, the other finding that we can get from this table about marginal effects is that an increase in fuel costs, as you can see again up there, when there is that increase in fuel cost by 1%, that will reduce the probability of using modern fuels, right? And that's really the fuel cost, as you can see. And the percentage there is actually 0.4%. Now, of course, this finding suggests that when the price of the clean fuels goes up, households revert to traditional fuels, jeopardizing the possibility of switching from the traditional to modern fuels. And that's really a very big issue, and has policy implications, and also it has implications for higher education. So meaning that there's a very big job that we have to do to try and improve or affect the situation. Now, the other finding that you get from that table is that that is now when we look at, for example, the marital status, you discover that the probability of using modern fuels by cooking increases by 1.2% for unmarried households. And that also has implications. And again, of course, the rest of the things can be, I think now I better move into implications again in the interest of time, right? But I think you can see all of these, most of these are significant, right? Climate shocks, marital status, you move up there, household, the fuel cost and so forth, and all these have implications. So let me now move to the implications, ladies and gentlemen. But before the implications, as I said, this is still work in progress. We are still examining the data because these are about 8 waves. And these are just preliminary findings that we find from, we get from this data set. Of course, we may not really make a very solid conclusion at this stage, but we have pointers that actually climate shocks in form of the shocks we've seen here, floods and so forth, and adaptive mechanisms affects switching from traditional to modern fuels. Now, I'll just highlight implications here. And one of the implications is that as climate change is increasingly manifesting through prolonged and erratic rainfall events and storms and floods that threaten the severity, that actually affect severely our households and our communities, right? developing countries like Uganda and a number of others need to prepare households for climate shocks and then try to build resilience of these households. And that's really an implication that we pick from this data. And of course, the other aspects that we may have to improve the household source of income. And in the case of Uganda, I must say that our government is trying her level best to ensure that they implement the parish development model. So they want to transform communities and transform households by ensuring that activity takes place at the household level so that they're able to improve and their earnings potential so that they can also stay afloat. So if this is implemented very well, then that means at the end of the day, we are likely to have an impact in the transition of households from using traditional fuels to modern fuels. Now, the other implication also is that we have to change the mindsets, right, of the household members, the mindsets of our communities, right? Because in Uganda, for example, there's a general belief that if you use traditional fuels for cooking, like firewood and so forth, the food that you are going to eat will be of better quality, right, and tasty. And that's why most of the households are not really transiting very fast from traditional fuels to clean fuels. So we need to come up with a mindset change programs for households so that they can actually move from that level. Now, lastly, are actually implications for higher education, meaning that really the research that we engage in must involve many other stakeholders, like, for example, bureaucrats, policymakers, and so forth. So, in other words, if they're involved in the research that we conduct, it means that they will also be able to learn many new things of what is happening out there, and this is likely to create a change in the way policies are being designed, so that you have evidence-based policies. And of course, that means their mindsets will also change about academicians and about the kind of research that we produce and the results. And they will be able to pick this information and implement it and use it. And then, of course, finally, in terms of dissemination, we have to really rethink. I know that we've been publishing in our work in the journals and so forth, but maybe this is out of reach of policymakers and the government bureaucrats, meaning that we need to really rethink the dissemination so that the information actually reaches these individuals. And we need also to participate in policy dialogues. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to really thank you very much for listening to me. And I want to thank Professor Allam Ahmed for giving me the opportunity to present. And I stop there. Over to you, Professor Allam Ahmed.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much. And also, thank you very much to the team with you in Uganda. And I'm sure one day we will all come to Makerere University. We want to see this great university and also to see your great school. Thank you very much. And we will definitely work hard on this work to complete and to be published. Yes, thank you very much, Professor.